At the end of the racing season 1936, which wasn't so very successful at our company, I was assigned to the racing department with the object of developing a new car for the racing season 1937. Now, naturally, at that time I hadn't any real idea about racing cars, and I took 2 racing cars of the type 1936 and went to the Nürburgring with a few mechanics and started to learn driving a racing car. Naturally, that's the thing you've got to be very careful at. So I made up my mind not to go off the road on one of the first laps, and I made a point of going round the course slower than with a normal passenger car, and to become quicker and quicker slowly. I used up 2 racing cars, and I drove about 2,500 miles, and after that I had an idea about racing cars. I could form an opinion what was wrong with the present racing cars, and I had pretty well made up my mind what one should change to improve for the coming season. First of all, you have to study the formula very closely, because naturally you have to try and get everything out of the formula you can. For example, the formula in 1937 was maximum weight 750 kilograms. The size of the engine was unlimited. You could use a supercharger or not. You could use any type of fuel. And naturally, we tried to put in the largest engine we could. The first thing is you have to decide on is what sort of engine, and then you go on to the other parts, the axles, the suspension, and which is quite a difficult point for the supercharged engine, was the tanks. The gas consumption of these engines was very high. We had a capacity of just about 400 liters. I don't quite know how much that is in gallons, but it's a tremendous lot. And it was always very difficult to get these large tanks into the body of the car. On the 5.6 liter, we had a single large tank at the back. But on later developments, when the gas consumption of the engines rose, we had to have a so-called saddle tank in front of the driver, which was built over his legs. And so the driver had a big tank in front of him and a big tank at the back. These 2 tanks were connected by large diameter hoses, and naturally if they had an accident, the danger of fire catching light was quite big. Actually, Seaman lost his life through an accident in Belgium when his car crashed against a tree and got torn in 2 pieces and the petrol started burning. But that was the only time that a fire occurred. Once the car has been designed, the best way to get it running as quickly as possible is to develop the individual parts of the engine and of the chassis on special tooling equipment. For example, it is far better to try out the valve drive on a test bench, because if a valve should break, it doesn't destroy an engine completely. It just falls off on a test bench. And we developed every single item of the engine, the valve drive, the supercharger, the connecting rod, on special test benches. And when we knew that every single part of the engine was safe, then we built up a complete engine and had it running. And this way we avoided destroying engines through miscellaneous defects. And once the engine had been built up, we could trim it for power. We did the same with the axles, with the suspension, also, for example, with the tanks. We had them on a test rig and gave them a thorough shaking, which was much more than they could have in actual racing. So we didn't have any tank leaks once the car was running. When we had the car built up, we took the complete car on a test bench and tried the car as a whole, tried the transmission, gear changes, the brakes, and when that was all right, then we went on to a racetrack, to the Nürburgring, and started with the actual road holding experiments. If you rely on the capacity of your driver to win your races, you're going to be in trouble. Of course, a racing driver is only absolutely safe if you can afford to drive just under the limit which is possible. And that he can only do if his car is superior to his competitors. Once he has to go to the limit, then racing becomes quite dangerous, and the probability of his going off the course or smashing his engine is very big. So the thing is to have a design which in a technical way is better than your competitors, then have good drivers and you have a good chance. Weighing in the cars before the race was a quite difficult matter for the different racing departments. Every company naturally had difficulty in getting their cars just under the limit of 750 kilos. And not all cars of the same type weighed the same. There was a difference, say, of 10 to 15 pounds. Now, if you are 15 pounds over the limit, the organizers are not going to accept the car, and you cannot know beforehand what the car is going to weigh exactly. Also, not all scales weigh exactly the same weight. So we generally went to the official scrutineering with a rather anxious feeling, and we knew that all our competitors were going to stand round, have a good look, were going to be very pleased if we were too heavy. On one occasion, one of the cars was too heavy, and the only possibility we found in that moment was to scratch off the paint, which was white at that time, and which had rather thick coating to make the panels look nice and even. We had to scrape all this nice paint off, which had cost a lot of money, a lot of time, and had to expose the blank aluminium. We got off quite a lot of pounds, and the car was inside the limits. And from that time on, our cars weren't painted anymore, and they had this well-known aluminum color. Now, if you had won a race, sometimes you had to prove your car was inside the limits, because the competitors and maybe the racing organizers weren't quite sure that after scrutineering you hadn't put something into your car. Of course, it would have been possible, if you were too heavy, to take out some gears and only have the first gear in and leave without the other gears, and for the race naturally put them in again. So they weren't never quite certain. So sometimes you had to prove after you had won a race that the car wasn't too heavy. And on one occasion I can remember that our car was actually a few pounds over the limits. Now in this case you can't take anything out of the car because everybody's looking on. And now the formula said that the car should be dry, that is, without gas and without oil. And the only thing we could do was to disassemble the whole car and wipe oil off every single part of the car. And by doing that and assembling the car dry again, we actually got in the limits. But that was quite a narrow affair. You have to put the best engineers and the best men on racing car development, because you naturally never have enough time, and if you make a mistake, you have no possibility of correcting it, and on each Monday you can read what you've been doing in the newspapers, and the comment isn't always very friendly if you've had a disaster of some sort. So if a big firm goes in for racing, you've got to do it in a big way, you've got to spend a lot of money, and you've got to spend a lot of time on it. Racing is good advertising if it's successful, but if you aren't successful, it has a very negative effect. And generally the non-technical department of firms comments rather unfavorably if you aren't successful. Our firm has always raced for a certain amount of years. We have accumulated experience, and then we have stopped for a certain time. And up to now, beginning from 1895, I believe, or 93, we have always done the same. We have raced for a time, and we have stopped again, and we have started again. Naturally, we cannot say at the present if we are going to race again and when we shall race again. but maybe we shall keep our tradition, which we have held up so long.
Meiner Meinung nach ist von allen Fahrern der ganzen Welt, ohne den anderen wehtun zu wollen, Rudolf Caracciola der Größte gewesen.
In my opinion, and I do not want with that now to give any harm to anybody, but in my personal opinion, I think the greatest diver ever has been Rudolf Caracciola.
Das resultiert zunächst daraus, dass kein Rennfahrer ununterbrochen so viele Jahre fuhr.
A proof for my opinion is the fact that no other racing driver has been so successful for so many years continuously.
Caracciola war aber auch universell. Er fuhr Zuverlässigkeitsfahrten, Bergrennen, Rekorde, Grand Prix und alles überhaupt. Das hat auch nicht jeder Rennfahrer aufzuweisen.
But there's another point, and that is that Caracciola has had a universal talent, because he was as good a diver in any reliability trial, in any hill climb, in any record diving, as in Grand Prix diving.
Man muss aber in diesem Zusammenhang auch seinen Fahrstil nennen. Caracciola hatte ein angeborenes Talent, zu dem es in erster Linie gehört. Und dann hatte er einen Fahrstil, das heißt, er fuhr die sogenannte zügige Fahrweise, bei der das Lenkrad wie mit Seidenpfötchen zart bewegt und nicht gerissen wird.
But in this connection has to be underlined also the fact that Caracciola had a very personal style. He was a born talent. He did not learn to dive, but he just felt it. His style was kind of unique because it was so soft. It was very fast, but always soft, always elegant, and that was the secret. It was elegant, but very fast.
Und diese zügige, weiche Fahrweise machte ihn auch zum besten Regenfahrer der Welt.
And this fact that he was such an elegant, fast diver was also the reason why he was the best diver in the wet when it rained.
Es muss auch an seinen Augen gelegen haben, denn wenn wir mit ihm mit dem Tourenwagen fuhren und keiner mehr durch einen Regenguss durchkam, setzte er sich an die Lenkung und fuhr normal weiter. Das verstehen wir heute noch nicht.
But part of the secret may also be his eyes, because he must have had some overnormal sight with his eyes, because so many times we noticed, even in normal traffic diving, that on heavy rain, when no other diver could see anything anymore, Rudolf Caracciola took the wheel, or anyway continued to dive when all the others had to stop because they couldn't see anything.